The blizzard didn't care that Alara Whitlock was dying. It screamed across the Wyoming wilderness like something starved and hunting, wind tearing at her frozen coat with skeletal fingers. Snow came at her sideways, blinding, suffocating. Each breath scraped her lungs raw. Each step forward felt like walking through broken glass. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. That should have scared her. Instead, it felt like mercy. 3 days ago, she'd had a horse. 2 days ago, she'd had food. Yesterday, she'd had hope, the kind that keeps your legs moving even when your mind knows better. Now she had nothing but the storm and the certainty that she'd made a terrible mistake. The East felt like another lifetime. Boston, with its brick buildings and gas lamps and the pretense of civilization. The parlor where her mother used to play piano. The library where her father taught her to read ledgers and contracts, preparing her for a future that got ripped away the moment their carriage went off that bridge. "You'll be taken care of," the lawyer had promised at the funeral, rain drumming on his umbrella. "Your cousin Marcus is a respectable man. He'll manage the estate until you come of age." Respectable. That word tasted like poison now. She'd believed it for exactly 3 months. 3 months of Marcus's cold smiles and careful questions. 3 months of watching him move through her father's study like he owned it, signing papers, dismissing staff, making decisions that somehow always benefited him. 3 months before she'd overheard the conversation that changed everything. "The girl's the only obstacle," Marcus had said, voice carrying through the office door. "Once she's gone, everything transfers to me as next of kin." Gone? The other voice, his lawyer, she'd later learned, sounded carefully neutral. "That's a strong word, Marcus." "Is it? Women die all the time. Consumption, fever, accidents." A pause, then colder. "Grief." She'd run that same night. Stupid, desperate, with nothing but the clothes on her back and an address scrawled on paper she'd found in her father's desk. A distant relative out west, a great uncle she'd never met, who'd left Boston decades ago for reasons no one talked about. The black sheep, the family embarrassment, her only chance. She'd used the last of her hidden money for train tickets, traveling under a fake name, jumping at every stranger's glance. Chicago, Omaha, Cheyenne. Each city smaller than the last, the air getting thinner, the sky getting bigger, until civilization gave way to something vast and indifferent. In Cheyenne, she'd bought a horse she couldn't afford, and supplies she didn't know how to use. The stable master had looked at her like she was already dead. "You know how to ride, miss?" "I'll learn. Where you headed?" She'd shown him the address. He'd actually laughed, a sound without humor. "That's 2 days' hard ride for a man who knows the country. For you?" He'd shaken his head. "Storm's coming too. You should wait." But waiting meant Marcus might catch up. Waiting meant the fear would win. So she'd ridden out at dawn, following directions that made sense on paper and none at all in practice. "Follow the creek west until you hit the canyon. North through the pass. Look for the Hale Ranch markers." She'd found the creek, made it to what might have been a canyon. Then the storm hit, and direction stopped mattering because she couldn't see 10 feet in any direction. The horse, a gentle mare named Bess who deserved a better rider, had lasted longer than Alara had any right to expect. But even animals have their limits. When Bess finally went down, legs buckling in a drift too deep to navigate, Alara had actually felt relieved. At least now she could stop pretending. She'd stripped what supplies she could carry and left the horse there. Not dead, but dying, and kept walking because stopping meant freezing, and freezing meant giving Marcus exactly what he wanted. Spite was a hell of a fuel, but spite only burned so long. Now, stumbling through snow that reached her thighs, Alara felt her body starting to make decisions without her. Her legs slowed. Her thoughts drifted. The cold that had been agony turned distant, almost warm. She knew what that meant. "Not yet," she said out loud, words snatched away by wind. "Just a little further." But further to what? She'd lost any sense of direction hours ago. For all she knew, she was walking in circles, or heading deeper into the wilderness, or back toward the civilization that wanted her dead. The irony would have been funny if she'd had the energy to laugh. Her father used to say she was stubborn. "Like a mule," he'd joke, eyes warm with affection. Once you set your mind to something, heaven help anyone who tries to stop you. Heaven wasn't helping now. Her boot caught on something buried in the snow, a rock, a branch, her own frozen feet. and she went down hard. The impact drove what little air she had from her lungs. Snow filled her mouth, her nose, and for a moment she couldn't remember how to care. Just rest. Just for a minute. The storm howled agreement. She tried to push herself up, but her arms wouldn't cooperate. The cold had them. The exhaustion had them. And maybe that was fine. Maybe this was as far as she was meant to go. At least Marcus wouldn't get the satisfaction of doing it himself. Elara closed her eyes. The storm sang her towards sleep. She didn't hear the hoofbeats at first. They blended with the wind, with her slowing heartbeat, with the static hiss of snow on snow, just another sound in the white noise of dying. But then something changed. The wind shifted, or maybe the storm paused to take a breath, and in that pocket of relative quiet, she heard it clearly, rhythmic, heavy, getting closer. Horse. Someone was riding through this hell. Elara forced her eyes open, but the world was just white on white on white. She tried to call out, but her voice came out as barely a whisper, stolen immediately by the wind. Move. You have to move. She managed to get one arm up, waving it weakly, a black shape against the white. It was pathetic. It was desperate. It was all she had left. The hoofbeats stopped. For a terrible moment, she thought she'd imagined it. Hypothermia playing tricks, her mind giving her hope as a final kindness before the end. Then a shadow fell across her. Through the curtain of snow, a shape materialized. Horse and rider merged into one dark mass, solid and real and impossible. The horse was massive, built for this country, with a chest like a barrel and legs that didn't falter in the deep snow. And the rider, Elara couldn't see his face. He wore a hat pulled low, a heavy coat, a scarf wrapped around his neck and jaw. But she could see his stillness, the way he sat in the saddle like he and the horse shared one spine, the way he looked down at her, silent, assessing, deciding. Please, she managed, the words scraping out. Please help me. He didn't respond, didn't move, just stared down at this half-frozen woman who'd appeared in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a storm that should have killed her already. She waited for him to leave. Why wouldn't he? She was a stranger, a problem, dead weight in a place where survival meant traveling light. Instead, he dismounted. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle, dropping to the ground and approaching her in 3 strides. Up close, she could see more. The line of his jaw beneath the scarf, shadowed with days of stubble. Eyes that were either gray or blue, hard to tell in the storm, but definitely cold. Assessing her not like a person, but like a problem with a solution he hadn't decided on yet. Can you stand? His voice was rough, low, shaped by wind and disuse. I don't know. Try. Not an offer of help. A command. Elara gritted her teeth and tried. Her legs shook, refused, then grudgingly obeyed enough to get her to her knees. The world tilted. She would have gone down again if his hand hadn't shot out, gripping her arm with enough force to hurt. Up. She made it to her feet through sheer spite, stood there swaying, held upright by his grip and nothing else. He studied her for another long moment. She got the sense he was cataloging everything, her Eastern clothes, completely wrong for this country. Her lack of supplies, the way her skin had gone gray-white with cold, adding it all up to a sum he didn't like. You alone? Yes? Horse? Dead, or dying, a mile back, maybe more. Supplies? Gone. Where were you headed? Hale Ranch? The words came out through chattering teeth. Looking for Edmund Hale. Something flickered in those cold eyes. Not surprise. Something worse. You're 3 months too late, he said flatly. Edmund's dead. The words hit like a physical blow. Elara felt her knees start to buckle, but his grip tightened, keeping her upright. You family? He asked. Great niece. He was I was told. She couldn't finish. The last thread of hope, the reason she'd risked everything, snapped clean. You come all this way not knowing he was dead? She couldn't even nod. Just stood there, held up by a stranger, while the last of her strength bled out into the snow. The man was quiet for a moment. Then he sighed, the sound of someone accepting a burden they didn't want. Get on the horse. What? storm's getting worse. You stay out here. You die. Get on the horse. Where are you taking me? Hale Ranch. His tone suggested this should be obvious. I own it now. Before she could process that, he'd lifted her, one arm behind her knees, one behind her back like she weighed nothing, and deposited her in the saddle. The horse shifted but didn't protest. Alara grabbed the saddle horn with frozen fingers, trying to stay upright. He swung up behind her, settling into the saddle with her in front of him. His arms came around her to grip the reins, caging her in. She could feel the heat of him at her back, the first real warmth she'd felt in days. She wanted to lean into it, wanted to let someone else carry the weight. Instead, she forced herself to stay rigid, spine straight, even as shivers racked her body. Name? He asked, voice close to her ear now. Alara. Alara Whitlock. Ronan Hale. Then he kicked the horse forward, and they disappeared into the white. The ride felt endless. Alara faded in and out of consciousness, jerking awake each time she started to slide, Ronan's arm tightening around her middle to keep her in place. She got impressions more than details. The steady rhythm of the horse's gait, the way Ronan's body stayed relaxed in the saddle despite the storm trying to tear them both off. The gradual shift from total whiteout to something that might have been visibility. When buildings finally emerged from the snow, dark shapes that resolved into a house, a barn, a scatter of outbuildings, she didn't believe they were real at first. We're here, Ronan said. Stay put. He dismounted and disappeared. She heard a door creak open, then his boots crunching back through the snow. This time, when he lifted her down, her legs wouldn't hold her at all. She crumpled, and he caught her with what might have been annoyance. Christ, he muttered, and picked her up again. He carried her into the house, blessed warmth, blessed stillness, and set her down in a chair near a wood stove that was already burning. She sat there shaking while he moved around the room with purpose, lighting a lamp, stoking the fire, pulling blankets from somewhere. The house was stark. That was the word. Functional. A main room with the wood stove, a rough table, a few chairs. Doors leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. Everything clean but worn, built for use rather than comfort. A man's house. A house without softness. Ronan wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, then another, pushed a cup of something into her hands. Water, she realized, and drank it without thinking. Only when it was gone did she register that her hands had thawed enough to hold the cup. Small victories. Get those wet clothes off, Ronan said, his back already turned. There's dry things in the bedroom, first door on the left. I can't feel my fingers. Then do it anyway. He wasn't being cruel, just practical. But Alara felt tears prick her eyes anyway. Exhaustion and relief and the delayed shock of how close she'd come. She stood on shaking legs and made her way to the bedroom he'd indicated. It was as spare as the main room. A bed with a patchwork quilt, a dresser, a trunk. She found clothes in the dresser that were far too large, meant for a man. She didn't care. Peeled off her frozen layers with fingers that barely worked, left them in a pile on the floor, and pulled on the shirt and pants that swallowed her frame. When she came back out, Ronan had food on the table. Bread, dried meat, cheese. Simple, but to Alara it looked like a feast. Eat slow, he said. You'll make yourself sick otherwise. She tried, but hunger made her hands shake, and she tore into the bread like an animal. He watched without comment, refilling her water when she drained it. Only when she'd eaten enough to quiet the worst of the hunger did he speak again. Why were you looking for Edmund? Alara set down the bread, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. He was family, the only family I had left who might... She trailed off. I needed help. What kind of help? The kind that involves staying alive. That got his attention. His eyes, gray, she could see now in the lamplight, sharpened. Someone after you? She should lie. Should keep her problems to herself. But she was so tired of running, of hiding, of pretending. My cousin. He wants me dead, or at least gone. I inherited land in Boston when my parents died, and he's next in line if something happens to me. The words came out flat, drained of emotion. He was planning to make something happen. So you ran? Yes. All the way out here? Yes. Ronan was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those cold, measuring eyes. And now Edmund's dead, and you've got nowhere to go. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. No. Anyone know you're here? I used a false name to travel, told no one where I was going. I thought... She laughed, the sound bitter. I thought I was being careful. You were stupid, Ronan said bluntly. Could have died a dozen ways before you even reached the territory. Should have died in that storm. I know. But you didn't. He stood, began clearing the table. So now we have a problem. I'll leave, Alara said quickly. In the morning, when the storm clears, I'll go to town. Find work. You won't have to... Town's 20 miles. Storm like this could be days before the pass is clear. He set the dishes in a basin, his back to her. Besides, that's not the problem. Then what is? He turned to face her, and his expression was harder than the storm outside. You're a woman alone on the frontier. Word gets out you inherited land back east. You'll have every fortune hunter and worse in 3 territories knocking on your door. And that's if your cousin doesn't track you down first. Alara felt cold again despite the fire. So what do you suggest? I suggest you face facts. You can't stay here unmarried. You can't go back east. You can't hide in town. You need protection, and protection out here comes with a name and a legal tie. It took her a moment to understand what he was saying. When she did, she actually laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. You're suggesting marriage. I'm suggesting survival. We don't even know each other. Don't need to. He crossed his arms, leaning against the table. I need someone to run the house. You need a name that'll keep the wolves at bay. It's practical. Practical, she repeated, the word tasting strange. You want to marry a stranger for practical reasons. You have a better idea? She didn't. That was the hell of it. Every option she'd had evaporated the moment Edmund died. Going back east meant Marcus. Staying here alone meant different dangers, but dangers all the same. And this man, this hard, cold stranger who'd pulled her from the storm, was offering the only solution that didn't end with her dead, or worse. What would you want from this marriage? She asked carefully. Clean house, hot food, someone who can handle themselves when I'm working the ranch, and silence. That last word came out hard. I don't want conversation. I don't want complaints. I don't want... He stopped himself. I want order, predictability, a house that runs smooth. That's it? His jaw tightened. That's it. What he wasn't saying screamed louder than his words. This wasn't about companionship. This wasn't about building a life together. This was a business arrangement, as cold as the snow outside, which, perversely, made it easier to consider. No pretense, no false promises, just survival dressed up in legal papers. And if I refuse, Alara asked, then I take you to town when the pass clears and you figure it out on your own. His expression didn't change. Your choice. Her choice. As if she had any real choices left. Alara looked around the sparse room at the man who'd saved her life and was now offering to tie his to hers for reasons that had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with convenience. She thought about her parents, who'd loved each other deeply, genuinely, who'd taught her that marriage should be built on affection and respect. They were dead. Those lessons felt like they belonged to a different world. This was the frontier, different rules, different prices. How would it work? She asked quietly. We ride to town when the weather clears, talk to the preacher, sign the papers. You take my name, you get my protection. I get a house that doesn't fall apart while I'm working. He paused. Separate bedrooms, separate lives under the same roof. This isn't... Again, he stopped himself. This is practical. Nothing more. Nothing more, she echoed. Yes or no, Alara? She should say no. Should find another way. Should believe that something better was possible. But belief didn't keep you warm. Belief didn't stop men like Marcus. Belief was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. Yes, she said, and watched something in his expression shutter closed. Good. Get some rest. We'll talk details in the morning. He walked away, disappearing into what she assumed was his bedroom, and closed the door with quiet finality. Alara sat alone by the fire, wrapped in blankets too large for her frame, in a house that would soon be hers in name only, having just agreed to marry a man who'd made it clear he wanted nothing from her but utility. She should cry, should feel the weight of how far she'd fallen. Instead, she felt nothing but a strange, hollow calm. She'd escaped Marcus. She'd survived the storm. And now she'd survived this too. That was all that mattered. The fire crackled. The wind howled against the walls. And Alara Whitlock closed her eyes, wondering what version of herself she'd wake up as in the morning. Dawn came gray and cold. Alara woke in the bedroom Ronan had indicated, still wearing his two large clothes, and for a moment didn't remember where she was. Then it all came back in a rush. The storm, the stranger, the proposal that wasn't really a proposal at all. She got up, moving slowly, her body one massive ache from the ordeal of yesterday. In the main room, she found the fire already going and Ronan nowhere in sight. A pot of coffee sat on the stove, still hot. She poured herself a cup and stood by the window, looking out at a world transformed. The storm had passed. What lay beyond the glass was devastating in its beauty. Snow as far as she could see, pristine white under a pale sky, broken only by the dark line of fence posts and the distant shapes of mountains. It was vast, empty, the kind of landscape that made humans feel small. The door opened and Ronan came in with a blast of cold air and an armful of firewood. He saw her by the window and nodded, not quite acknowledgement, not quite greeting. "Storm's done," he said, stacking the wood. "Pass should clear by tomorrow. We'll go to town day after." "To get married?" "Yes." The word sat between them like something solid. Alara took a sip of coffee, buying herself a moment. "What do I need to know?" "About what?" "This place. What you expect. How this works." Ronan straightened, brushing snow from his coat. "You cook?" "Some." "Can you learn?" "Yes." "Clean?" "Obviously." "Mend clothes, handle livestock if needed, shoot?" That last one stopped her. "Shoot?" "This isn't Boston. Things come up. Animals, sometimes worse." He met her eyes. "I won't always be here. You need to be able to handle yourself." "Then I'll learn," she said, lifting her chin. He studied her for a moment, and something almost like approval flickered in his expression. "Fair enough. There's clothes in the trunk that might fit better, belong to—" He stopped. "They're there if you need them." "Belong to who? A sister? A mother?" Someone he didn't want to talk about, clearly. Alara didn't push. "Anything else I should know before we do this?" she asked instead. Ronan poured his own coffee, took a long drink, then set the cup down with careful precision. "I'm not a good man, Alara. I'm not cruel, but I'm not kind either. I won't hit you, won't force you, won't make your life harder than it needs to be. But don't expect more than what I'm offering." "Which is?" "A roof, protection, my name on papers that'll keep you safe." He looked at her directly. "That's it. Don't look for warmth. Don't look for love. Don't look for anything resembling what you probably thought marriage should be." His honesty was brutal, but Alara found herself respecting it more than pretty lies would have earned. "Understood," she said. "And what should you expect from me?" "Same. Do your part. Keep the house. Don't cause problems." He paused. "And don't lie to me. Whatever trouble you're running from, I need to know if it's coming here." Guilt twisted in her chest. Should she tell him about Marcus now? About the full extent of what she was dragging into his life? But the words stuck in her throat. What if he changed his mind? What if knowing the truth made her too much of a risk? "I'll keep my end of the bargain," she said instead, and hated herself a little for the evasion. If Ronan noticed, he didn't comment, just nodded and went back to his coffee. They spent the rest of the day in careful orbit around each other. Ronan worked, checking on livestock, clearing snow, doing the 100 tasks that kept a ranch running. Alara explored the house, taking inventory of what she had to work with. The kitchen was functional but bare. She found flour, salt, dried beans, coffee, staples meant to keep a man alive, not to make meals enjoyable. The clothes in the trunk fit better than Ronan's shirts, though they hung loose on her frame. They'd belonged to a woman with a fuller figure, someone who'd lived here and left behind pieces of herself. Alara didn't ask about her. That evening, she made dinner, simple stew from dried meat and vegetables she found in the root cellar. Ronan ate without comment, which she chose to interpret as approval. "Tomorrow I'll start clearing the pass," he said when he'd finished. "Day after that, we ride to town." "How far is it?" 4 hours in good weather, maybe 6 with the snow." "And the preacher will just marry us? No questions?" Preacher Thompson's seen stranger things. Long as we're both willing, he'll do it. Ronan stood, carried his bowl to the basin. Get some rest. It'll be a long ride. He disappeared into his room again, and Alara was left alone with the dishes and her thoughts. This was really happening. In 2 days, she'd be married to a man she'd known for barely longer, tied to him legally, if not emotionally. Stuck in this stark house in the middle of nowhere, playing wife to someone who'd made it clear he wanted nothing more from her than function. It was insane. It was the only option she had. Alara washed the dishes, banked the fire, and went to bed in a room that didn't feel like hers, wondering if anything ever would again. The ride to town was exactly as uncomfortable as Alara had anticipated. Ronan had given her a horse, not Bess, who died in the storm, but a sturdy gelding named Tucker, who seemed utterly indifferent to her inexperience. She sat in the saddle like she'd been taught during her brief privileged childhood, back straight, hands light on the reins, and tried not to think about how every muscle in her body screamed protest. Ronan rode ahead, silent as the landscape. They followed a rough trail through snow that was already starting to melt in places, revealing the dead grass underneath. The mountains loomed on all sides, making her feel trapped and exposed at the same time. "This town have a name?" she asked after an hour of silence. "Redemption." "That's optimistic." "That's ironic." He didn't elaborate. Another hour passed. Alara's thighs burned, her back ached. But she didn't complain. Ronan had made it clear he had no patience for weakness, and some stubborn part of her refused to prove him right. When buildings finally appeared on the horizon, a scatter of wooden structures huddled together against the vast emptiness, she felt a relief so profound it was almost dizzying. Redemption was barely a town. A main street of packed dirt, lined with a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, a handful of other buildings that might have been homes or businesses. Everything looked weathered, temporary, like the whole place might blow away in the next strong wind. People stared as they rode in, not hostile exactly, but assessing, calculating. The kind of looks that said strangers were notable, and this woman riding behind Ronan Hale was very strange indeed. Ronan ignored them all, tying his horse outside a small building with a cross mounted on the front. The church, such as it was. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared inside. Alara dismounted, wincing as her legs protested. She stood by the horses, acutely aware of the eyes on her. A woman in men's clothes, too thin, too pale, clearly not from here. She lifted her chin and met their stares with what she hoped looked like confidence. Ronan emerged 5 minutes later with a man who had to be the preacher, 60-ish, with kind eyes and a careful way of moving that suggested old injuries. "Miss Whitlock," the preacher said, offering his hand. "Thomas Thompson. Ronan tells me you two are looking to marry." "That's right. Quickly, from what I understand." "Yes." Thompson studied her with those kind eyes, and Alara got the sense he was seeing more than she wanted to show. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure. Because if you need help, if you're in some kind of trouble, I'm fine," she said firmly. "This is what I want." It wasn't exactly a lie. Want was too strong a word. But need? Yes. This was what she needed. Thompson looked between her and Ronan, clearly weighing something. Then he sighed. "All right, come inside. Let's get this done proper." The church was even smaller inside, just rows of rough benches and a simple altar. No decoration, no warmth. The kind of place where faith was practical rather than beautiful. Thompson positioned them in front of the altar, pulled out a worn Bible, and began the ceremony with a kind of weary efficiency that suggested he'd done this too many times to romanticize it. "Dearly beloved," the words washed over Alara like water. She made the responses when prompted, her voice steady even as her hands shook. Ronan's voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reading from a contract, which, in a way, he was. "Do you, Ronan Hale, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Alara Whitlock, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" She looked at Ronan. Really looked at him. This hard, cold stranger who'd saved her life and was now offering his name. This man who'd made it clear he expected nothing and offered little. Her future. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." Thompson closed his Bible. "You may kiss the bride." Ronan went very still. Alara saw something flicker in his eyes. Hesitation? Discomfort? Before his expression shuddered again. That won't be necessary, he said. Thompson raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Well then, let's get the papers signed. They signed the marriage certificate in silence. Alara's hand shook only slightly as she wrote her new name for the first time, Alara Hale. It looked wrong on the page, like someone else's name entirely. Congratulations, Thompson said, though his tone suggested condolences might be more appropriate. I hope you both find what you're looking for. Thank you, Alara managed. They left the church as husband and wife, legally bound, and the town's eyes followed them with renewed interest. Ronan ignored it all, heading for the general store. Need to pick up supplies, he said. Might as well do it while we're here. Inside, the proprietor, a heavy man with suspicious eyes, looked between them with barely concealed curiosity. Heard you two just got hitched, he said to Ronan. Congratulations. Thanks. Need flour, salt, coffee? While Ronan listed supplies, Alara wandered the store, taking in the sparse inventory. Everything was expensive, she noted. This far from civilization, goods cost 3 times what they would back east. She was examining a display of fabric when a woman's voice cut through the quiet. Well, so the rumors are true. Alara turned to find a woman about her age, pretty in a sharp way, with blonde hair and eyes that could cut glass. She was dressed well for redemption, a clean dress, a fitted coat, and she looked at Alara like she was something scraped off a boot. I'm sorry. You married Ronan. Not a question, an accusation. Fast work for someone who just rolled into town. I don't believe we've met. Sarah Connolly. The woman stepped closer, lowering her voice to something poisonous. I'm someone who knows Ronan Hale a lot better than you ever will. So let me give you some advice, new wife. Don't get comfortable. He doesn't keep things he doesn't want. Before Alara could respond, Ronan appeared at her shoulder. Sarah, he said, his tone flat. We're done here. Are you? Sarah's smile was all teeth. That's what you said last time. Something passed between them. History, anger, something Alara couldn't read. Then Ronan took Alara's arm, firm but not rough, and steered her toward the door. Let's go. They loaded the supplies in silence, mounted the horses in silence. Only when they were clear of town, following the trail back toward the ranch, did Alara speak. Should I ask? No. She seemed to think she had a claim on you. She doesn't. But she did once. Ronan's jaw tightened. Once. Past tense. Done and buried. Clearly not for her. Not my problem. He glanced at her, something hard in his eyes. And it's not yours either. That's what I meant about separate lives. My past stays my past. Yours stays yours. We don't dig into things that don't concern us. It should have felt like a relief. Permission not to share, not to explain, not to bear all the ugly parts of herself. Instead, it felt like a wall going up. Another barrier between her and this man she'd just tied her life to. Fine, she said. Fine. They rode the rest of the way in silence, husband and wife in name only, and when the ranch came into view, Alara felt nothing resembling homecoming. Just the dull certainty that she'd traded one kind of cage for another. But at least this one came with a lock on the inside. She'd take what she could get. The first week of marriage passed like a slow bleed. Alara learned the rhythms of the ranch the way you learn a language by immersion, through mistakes, frustration, and the silent corrections of a husband who spoke only when necessary. Ronan left before dawn most days, checking fences or livestock, or whatever it was ranchers did in the frozen wasteland that passed for spring. He returned at dusk, ate whatever she'd managed to cook, and disappeared into his room without more than a handful of words. She told herself it was fine, this was the arrangement, separate lives under one roof. But the silence had weight. It pressed against her skull, made her hyper-aware of every sound she made. The scrape of a chair, the clatter of dishes, her own breathing. She caught herself holding her breath sometimes, trying to take up less space in a house that felt too small and too large at the same time. The work helped, gave her hands something to do while her mind circled the same useless questions. She learned to coax heat from the temperamental wood stove, to stretch meals from ingredients that seemed designed to resist becoming food. The bread she made the third day came out dense enough to use as a weapon, and she'd stood there staring at it, This inedible brick, feeling tears prick her eyes for the first time since the wedding. Ronan had come in while she was trying to saw through it with a knife. "That's not bread," he'd said, not unkindly, just stating fact. "I know." He'd watched her struggle for another moment, then crossed to the shelf and pulled down a jar she hadn't noticed. "Starter. You need yeast. Here." He'd shown her, hands moving with surprising deftness, how to mix it properly. Didn't say much, but his actions filled the gaps, his words left empty. When the second batch came out edible, he'd eaten 3 slices without comment. She'd counted that as a victory. The clothes in the trunk became her wardrobe. Simple dresses, worn but well-made, altered with needle and thread to fit her thinner frame. She found herself wondering about the woman who'd owned them. The way the hem on one dress had been let out and taken in again suggested someone who'd gained weight, then lost it. Pregnancy, maybe. Or illness. There were no pictures in the house. No feminine touches left behind. Just these clothes and the ghost of someone who'd lived here and vanished. On the 8th day, Alara was scrubbing the floor, another task she'd never done in Boston and was learning through trial and error, when someone knocked on the door. She froze, brush dripping sudsy water onto boards she'd just cleaned. They were miles from town. No one just dropped by. The knock came again, firm, insistent. She stood, wiping her hands on her apron, and opened the door to find a woman on the porch. Older, maybe 50, with iron gray hair pulled back severe and eyes that cataloged everything in a single glance. "You must be the new Mrs. Hale," the woman said. Not hostile, but not warm either. "I'm Margaret Webb. I run the ranch 2 valleys over." "Alara, please come in." Margaret stepped inside with the confidence of someone used to going where she pleased. She took in the cleaned floor, the folded laundry on the chair, the pot simmering on the stove, and something in her expression softened fractionally. "You keep a decent house," she said. "Better than I expected." Expected? For an Eastern girl who married Ronan Hale inside a week of meeting him. Margaret pulled out a chair and sat without invitation. "People talk, dear, especially when something this peculiar happens." Alara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It's not anyone's business." "Out here, everything's everyone's business. Survival depends on knowing your neighbors." Margaret accepted the coffee Alara poured without asking. "But I didn't come to gossip. Came to take a measure of you, see if you're going to make it." "And?" "Jury's still out." Margaret sipped her coffee, made a face. "Needs more grounds, but you're trying, which is more than some would do. This place breaks women who aren't ready for it." "I'm ready. Are you?" Margaret set down her cup. "Because Ronan Hale's not an easy man. Oh, he's decent enough. Won't mistreat you. Won't let anyone else mistreat you either. But he's hard. Closed off. And this ranch has ghosts." There it was again, the thing no one would say directly. "What ghosts?" Alara asked. Margaret studied her for a long moment. "Not my story to tell. But I'll say this. You're not the first woman in this house, and the first one didn't survive it." The words landed like stones in water, sending ripples through everything Alara thought she understood. "What happened to her?" "Like I said, not my story." Margaret stood. "But you seem like you've got spine. You'll need it. This country doesn't care about your feelings, and neither does Ronan. You want to make this work, you stop waiting for warmth and build your own fire." She headed for the door, then paused. "There's a women's gathering first Sunday of each month. Quilting mostly, but it's a chance to get out. You should come. Even frontier wives need people who aren't their husbands." "I'll think about it." "You do that." Margaret's expression shifted, became almost kind. "And Alara? Don't let the silence eat you alive. It's got teeth if you let it." Then she was gone, leaving Alara alone with questions that multiplied like weeds. That night, when Ronan came in from whatever he'd been doing, she broke their unspoken rule about not asking personal questions. Who was she? He stopped in the middle of removing his coat. Who was who? "The woman whose clothes I'm wearing. The one who lived here before me." His expression went carefully blank. "That's not something we need to discuss. Margaret Webb came by today. She said I'm not the first woman in this house. Margaret should mind her own business. She also said the first one didn't survive. What does that mean?" Ronan hung his coat with deliberate care, his back to her. When he finally turned around, His face was harder than she'd seen it. It means exactly what it sounds like. My wife died 3 years ago. And before you ask, no, I don't want to talk about it. No, it doesn't concern you. And no, I won't be answering questions about her. I'm wearing her clothes. Then don't wear them. Burn them. I don't care. His voice was flat, empty of everything except a warning she'd be stupid to ignore. We had an agreement, Ilara. Separate lives. My past is mine. This counts as past. Fine, she said, anger sparking hot in her chest. But when people in town look at me like I'm some kind of replacement, don't expect me to have answers. I don't expect anything from you except what we agreed on. Same as you shouldn't expect anything from me. He walked to his room and shut the door, ending the conversation with brutal finality. Ilara stood in the kitchen, surrounded by dead woman's clothes and living man's silence, and felt something crack inside her. Not her resolve. Something else. The last piece of the girl from Boston who'd believed in fairy tales and happy endings. That girl was gone. What remained was whatever could survive in the vacuum Ronan Hale called a marriage. She didn't burn the clothes, but she stopped wondering about the woman who'd worn them first. The days bled into weeks. March gave way to April, and the snow receded enough to reveal the ranch in all its harsh beauty. Fences that needed mending, outbuildings that wanted paint. A garden plot choked with dead vegetation from last year. Ilara attacked the garden with something close to fury. Dug out the dead plants, turned the soil, planted seeds she bought on a trip to town with money Ronan left on the table without explanation. She worked until her hands blistered and her back screamed, and when Ronan came upon her one evening, dirt under her nails and sweat on her face, he stopped. You know how to garden? I'm learning. He studied the neat rows she'd planted, the careful spacing. You're doing it wrong. Instead of being offended, she felt relief. Then show me. He did. Knelt in the dirt beside her and demonstrated proper depth, proper distance. His hands were scarred, she noticed. Old burns, cuts that had healed crooked, the map of a life lived hard. Frost's still a risk, he said. Might lose everything if we get a late freeze. Then I'll replant. Something flickered in his expression. Not quite approval, but close. You're more stubborn than you look. I've been told that before. They worked in silence after that. But it felt different. Less empty. Like maybe silence could be companionable instead of suffocating. That night, for the first time, they ate dinner at the same time instead of her leaving his plate warming on the stove. He didn't say much, but he stayed at the table after finishing, drinking coffee while she cleaned up. Margaret invited me to the women's gathering, Ilara said, testing the waters. You should go. You don't mind? Why would I mind? I thought you wanted me here, running the house. I want you to not lose your mind from isolation. He set down his cup. Frontier breaks people who don't have an outlet. You want to quilt with the church ladies? Go quilt. They're not all church ladies. Near enough? He stood. I'll ride you into town when it comes up. Don't go alone. It was as close to concern as she'd heard from him. She didn't know what to do with it. Thank you, she said. He just nodded and disappeared into his room. The Sunday gathering was exactly what Margaret had promised. A handful of women in the back room of the general store, working on a quilt that seemed to have no end. They looked up when Ilara entered, faces ranging from curious to suspicious to cautiously welcoming. Well, one of them said, a young woman with red hair and a baby on her hip. You actually came. I actually came, Ilara agreed. I'm Ann Foster. This is my daughter Lucy. She gestured to the other women. That's Martha, she runs the boarding house. Helen, her husband's the blacksmith. And you've met Margaret. They made space for her at the frame, handed her a needle, and for 20 minutes, no one said anything beyond instructions on stitching. Ilara got the sense she was being evaluated, measured against some invisible standard. Finally, Martha broke the silence. So, you and Ronan Hale... Yes, quick courtship. Very. Must have been quite something to marry that fast. Ilara kept her eyes on her stitching. It made sense for both of us. Made sense, Helen repeated, not unkindly. That's a careful way to put it. He needed someone to run the house. I needed... She stopped. How much to reveal? I needed a fresh start. Running from something? Anne asked. The baby fussed, and she shifted her to the other hip. Aren't we all? That got a few nods of understanding. Margaret caught her eye and gave the smallest hint of approval. Well, sir, Martha said. At least Ronan's steady. Won't cheat you, won't drink away the money, won't raise a hand. That's more than some can say. But he's cold, Helen added. No offense, dear, but the man's got ice where most people have a heart. He's been through a lot, Margaret said quietly. Haven't we all? Martha's expression softened. But what happened to Clara? That would freeze anyone. Alara's needle stopped. Clara? The room went very quiet. His first wife, Anne said finally. You didn't know? He doesn't talk about her. No, he wouldn't. Margaret set down her own needle. Clara was a sweet thing. Came from back east, like you. They seemed happy enough, considering. Then she got pregnant, and she trailed off. What happened? Alara asked, even though part of her didn't want to know. Winter baby, Helen said. Complications. Doc couldn't get there in time because of the snow. She bled out while Ronan watched. Baby, too. The room felt airless. Alara thought about the clothes in the trunk, the let-out hem. Pregnancy. How long ago? 3 years come June, Martha said. He hasn't been the same since. Wasn't exactly warm before, but after Clara, he just shut down. Stopped going to town except when necessary. Stopped talking to anyone. We were surprised when we heard he'd married again. Shocked, more like, Anne corrected. No one thought Ronan would take another wife. Figured he'd learned his lesson about bringing Eastern women to this country. Alara felt their eyes on her, weighing her chances of surviving what Clara hadn't. I'm not Clara, she said firmly. No, Margaret agreed. You're harder. That might help. They went back to quilting, but the conversation had shifted. They asked her questions, careful ones, nothing too invasive, about Boston, her journey west, what she thought of redemption. She answered honestly where she could, vaguely where she couldn't. By the time Ronan came to collect her, she felt like she'd passed some kind of test. He was waiting outside with the wagon, face unreadable as always. She climbed up beside him, and they started the ride home in familiar silence. Halfway back, she broke it. They told me about Clara. His hands tightened on the reins. Did they? Why didn't you tell me? Because it's not your concern. I'm living in her house, wearing her clothes, sleeping in her bed. Her voice rose despite herself. How is that not my concern? Because she's dead. The words came out harsh, cutting. She's dead, and talking about her won't change that. Won't make anything easier. Won't make you feel better about this arrangement. That's not why I'm asking. Then why are you asking? Because I need to understand who you are. Because I can't live with a ghost I'm not allowed to acknowledge. He pulled the wagon to a stop, turning to face her with an expression that was finally something more than blank. You want to know who I am? I'm a man who watched his wife die in front of him while he couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. I'm a man who buried his child before it drew breath. I'm a man who swore he'd never put himself through that again. His jaw was tight, words coming out like he was tearing them from somewhere deep. That's who I am. That's what you married. And if you're waiting for me to become something else, you'll be waiting forever. Alara stared at him, seeing past the ice for the first time to the hurt underneath. Not healed, not even close, just frozen over like everything else about him. I'm not asking you to become something else, she said quietly. I'm just asking you to let me exist here without feeling like I'm trespassing on her memory. Something in him seemed to crack, just slightly. You're not trespassing. Then stop treating me like I am. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him struggling with something. What to say, how much to give, whether to give anything at all. I don't know how, he said finally, quietly. I don't know how to do this any other way. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to her. Then we'll figure it out together, Alara said. Or we won't. But either way, I need you to stop shutting me out completely. I can handle distance, I can handle silence, but I can't handle feeling like I don't exist. He nodded once, picked up the reins, started the wagon moving again. They didn't talk the rest of the way home, but when they arrived and he helped her down from the wagon, his hand lingered on hers for just a second longer than necessary. It wasn't much, but it was something. That night, she found a book on her bedside table, Old, worn, the cover faded. A collection of poems. She opened it and found an inscription on the first page in feminine handwriting. To Clara, with love. She almost closed it, almost left it untouched, another piece of the past she wasn't supposed to acknowledge. Instead, she read the first poem, then another. And when she finally blew out her lamp, the book stayed on the nightstand, not trespassing, just existing in the same space as what came before. The spring work intensified. Calving season hit, which meant Ronan was gone for days at a time, sleeping in the line shack to watch over the herd. Alara ran the house alone, and the isolation she'd feared turned out to be a relief. No walking on eggshells, no carefully measured words, just her and the work and the vast silence of the land. She was hauling water from the well one afternoon when she saw riders approaching. 2 of them, moving at an easy pace, not hurried, but purposeful. Her first instinct was fear. Marcus had found her, but she forced it down. These were local men, probably. Neighbors. Nothing to panic about. Still, she set down the bucket and waited by the porch, within reach of the rifle Ronan kept by the door. The riders got closer, and she could make out details. Both wore dusty trail clothes, hats pulled low. The one in front sat his horse like a man used to being obeyed. The second one had eyes that never stopped moving, cataloging everything. They pulled up about 20 feet from the porch. "Ma'am," the first one said, touching his hat brim. "I'm looking for Ronan Hale. He's not here. When do you expect him back?" "I don't know. Few days, maybe?" She kept her voice level. "Can I give him a message?" The man exchanged a glance with his companion. "You his wife?" "I am." "Name's Carter, Jack Carter. I run cattle on the South Range." He shifted in his saddle. "Your husband and I have some business to discuss." "What kind of business?" "The kind between men, ma'am. No offense." Alara felt her spine straighten. "If it concerns this ranch, it concerns me. So either tell me what you want or come back when Ronan's here." Carter's eyes narrowed. "You got some spine, I'll give you that. But this is about water rights. Creek that runs through Hale land also waters my stock. We've had an agreement, your husband and I. I'm here to make sure that agreement stands." "What agreement?" "Equal access. My cattle drink from the creek same as his. Been that way for 5 years." "Then I don't see why anything would change." "Don't you?" Carter leaned forward in his saddle. "New wife might have new ideas. Might think she knows better about how things should run out here." "I'm smart enough to know I don't know everything," Alara said. "But I'm also smart enough to know when someone's testing me. So here's what I'll tell you, Mr. Carter. When Ronan gets back, I'll let him know you came by. If he wants to change the agreement, he'll tell you himself. If not, things stay as they are. That good enough?" Carter studied her for a long moment, then smiled. Not friendly, but not entirely hostile either. "You know what? It is. You tell Ronan I stopped by." "I will." He turned his horse, then paused. "One more thing. You get any strangers coming around asking questions, you tell Ronan about that too. We've had some trouble lately. Cattle going missing, fences cut. Could be nothing, but it pays to be careful," Alara finished. "Exactly." He touched his hat again. "Good day, Mrs. Hale." They rode off, and Alara stood there, heart pounding, trying to process what had just happened. She'd handled it, held her ground. But Carter's warning echoed in her head. Strangers asking questions. Trouble. She told herself it was coincidence, that Marcus couldn't have tracked her here, that she was safe. But fear had teeth, and it was starting to bite. When Ronan finally came home 4 days later, exhausted and covered in dust, she told him about Carter's visit. He listened without interruption, face unreadable. "You did fine," he said when she finished. He mentioned trouble, cattle going missing. "It happens. Rustlers work the territory every few years." He also said to watch for strangers asking questions. Ronan's expression sharpened. "Strangers like who?" "He didn't say." She hesitated. "Is that something I should worry about?" "Out here, you should always be a little worried. Keeps you alert." He studied her face. "But you're not asking about general trouble. You're asking about specific trouble. Your trouble." She should have known he'd see through her. "I don't think so, but you're not sure." "No." He was quiet for a moment. "If your cousin's smart, he'll have let you go." The cost of finding someone who doesn't want to be found is usually more than the prize is worth. Usually? Usually. He met her eyes. But if he does come, if anyone comes asking about you, you tell me immediately. Understood? Yes. I mean it, Ilara. No hiding it. No trying to handle it yourself. That's what this marriage is for. Protection. But I can't protect you if I don't know what's coming. The irony of him asking for honesty while keeping his own secrets wasn't lost on her, but she nodded anyway. I'll tell you, it was a lie. Or at least not the full truth. Because telling him everything meant admitting the full scope of what she'd brought to his door. And she wasn't ready for that. Wasn't ready to see his expression when he realized she wasn't just running from a cousin who wanted her inheritance. She was running from a man who'd killed before. That night, she lay awake long after the house went quiet, listening to the wind test the walls and wondering how long she could keep the truth buried before it clawed its way to the surface on its own. The lies caught up with her on a Tuesday. Ilara was in the garden, pulling weeds from between the rows of young vegetables that had finally started to break through the soil when she heard the horse. Single rider, coming fast. She straightened, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, and felt her stomach drop. The rider wasn't Ronan. Wrong build, wrong horse, wrong everything. She dropped the weeds and moved toward the house, not running, but not dawdling either. Her hand found the rifle just as the rider pulled up in the yard, dust swirling around the horse's legs. The man who dismounted was a stranger, 40-something, with a face that had seen too much sun and eyes that had seen too much of everything else. He wore travel-worn clothes and a gun on his hip that looked well used. "Mrs. Hale," he said, not a question, like he already knew. "Can I help you?" She kept the rifle pointed down but visible. "I'm looking for a woman. Young, dark hair, came west a few months back. Traveling under the name Sarah Miller." He pulled a photograph from his coat pocket, held it up. "This look familiar?" Ilara's blood went cold. The photograph was old, taken 3 years ago at a society function in Boston. She recognized herself in it, even though that girl felt like someone else entirely. "No," she said, proud that her voice stayed steady. "I've never seen her." The man studied her face with the kind of attention that said he made his living reading people. "That's interesting, because I've got witnesses who say a woman matching this description got off the train in Cheyenne, bought a horse, headed this direction." Witnesses can be wrong. They can be, but they usually aren't when there's money involved. He tucked the photograph away. "See, this woman's family is real worried about her, real eager to have her home safe, enough that they're offering a reward for information." "How much?" The question was out before she could stop it. His smile was slow, knowing, enough to make lying about recognizing a photograph seem awful foolish. Ilara's grip tightened on the rifle. "I told you, I don't know her. Now get off my property." "Your property?" He looked around the ranch, assessing. "That's a mighty strong claim for a woman who's been here, what, 2 months? 3? Long enough to know when someone's trespassing. Fair enough." He remounted his horse but didn't leave. "But here's the thing, Mrs. Hale. I'm good at my job, real good. And my job is finding people who don't want to be found. So when I ask around town about the new wife Ronan Hale brought home, and I hear she showed up out of nowhere right around the same time my missing woman disappeared," he shrugged. "Well, that's what we call interesting coincidence. Coincidence is all it is. Maybe. Maybe not." He touched his hat. "I'll be in redemption for a few days, asking questions, talking to people. And if I find out you lied to me today, Mrs. Hale, well, that reward money goes to whoever gives me the truth. Might be you'd rather cooperate now than have your neighbors sell you out later." He rode off before she could respond, leaving Ilara standing in the yard with a rifle in her hands and fear climbing her spine like ice. She should have told him the truth, should have admitted everything right there, dealt with the consequences. Instead, she'd lied. Added another brick to the wall of deception that was going to collapse on her eventually. The question was whether it would crush her alone or take Ronan down with it. She was still standing there, paralyzed by indecision, when Ronan rode in an hour later. He took one look at her face and dismounted fast. "What happened?" "Nothing. I'm fine." "You're white as snow and holding that rifle like you're about to shoot someone. Try again." The concern in his voice almost broke her. She set down the rifle with shaking hands. A man came by, looking for someone. What man? I don't know. He didn't give a name, but he had a photograph. Asked if I'd seen her. Had you? This was it. The moment to come clean, to trust the man she'd married with the truth she'd been hiding. No, she lied. But he seemed to think I was lying, said he'd be in town asking questions. Ronan's expression went hard. Describe him. She did, in as much detail as she could remember. When she finished, Ronan was quiet for a long moment, jaw working like he was chewing on something unpleasant. That's a bounty hunter, he said finally. Man named Garrett. Works out of Denver mostly. If he's here, someone paid him well. Bounty hunter for what? I thought those were for criminals. They are, but they also find runaway wives, missing heirs, anyone someone's willing to pay to locate. His eyes fixed on her. Which brings me back to you. Want to tell me why a bounty hunter's showing photographs around my ranch? I don't know. Alara. I don't. The words came out too sharp, too defensive. Maybe he's looking for someone else. Maybe it's coincidence. You don't believe in coincidence any more than I do. He was right, but admitting that meant admitting everything else, and she wasn't ready, wasn't brave enough. I'm telling you the truth, she said, meeting his eyes even though it cost her. I don't know why he's here. Ronan stared at her for a long moment, and she saw the exact second he decided not to push. Not because he believed her, but because he was giving her the choice to lie. Fine, he said, but if Garrett comes back, you tell him to talk to me. Don't answer any more questions. Understand? Yes. And Alara? His voice went quiet, almost gentle. Whatever you're running from, it's going to catch up eventually. Lying just makes the landing harder. He walked away before she could respond, leaving her alone with her guilt and the certain knowledge that she'd just made everything worse. That night she couldn't sleep. Every sound made her jump, the wind against the shutters, the house settling, her own heartbeat too loud in her ears. She got up finally, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, and went to the kitchen for water. Ronan was already there. He sat at the table in the dark, a bottle of whiskey in front of him and a glass in his hand. Not drunk, from what she could tell, but definitely drinking. She almost backed away, but he'd already seen her. Can't sleep either? He asked. No. Pull up a chair. She did slowly. He poured a second glass without asking and pushed it across the table. She took it, sipped, and felt the burn all the way down. I don't usually drink, she said. I don't usually share. He refilled his own glass. But tonight seems like an exception kind of night. They sat in silence for a while, drinking whiskey that tasted like regret and poor decisions. Outside, something called in the darkness. Coyote, maybe, or just the wind playing tricks. You want to know something funny? Ronan said finally. When I agreed to marry you, I told myself it was practical, smart, a solution to a problem. It was all those things. No, it was me being a coward. He stared into his glass. I watched Clara die because I couldn't get help in time, because this country doesn't care if you need a doctor or if a storm's coming or if you're watching everything you love bleed out in front of you, and I swore I'd never put myself in that position again. Alara's throat tightened. Then why marry me? Because when I found you in that storm, half dead and still fighting, I saw something I recognized, someone who'd rather die than quit. And I thought maybe... He trailed off, shook his head. Doesn't matter what I thought. Tell me anyway. I thought maybe if I kept it practical, if I kept the distance, I could have someone in this house without it mattering, without it hurting if things went wrong. He finally looked at her. But that's not how it works, is it? No, she whispered. It's not. You matter, Alara. I didn't want you to, but you do. And whatever trouble's following you, whatever you're not telling me, I need you to know that when it gets here, I'm not going to let it take you, even if you don't trust me enough to tell me the truth. The words hit like a physical blow. He knew. Maybe not the details, but he knew she was lying, and he was choosing to protect her anyway. She should tell him, right now, everything. Ronan, don't. He stood abruptly. Don't tell me tonight. Tell me when you're ready, or don't tell me at all. But don't tell me because the whiskey made you feel guilty. He left the bottle and walked away, and Alara sat alone in the dark, crying for the first time since she'd fled Boston. Garrett stayed in redemption for 3 days, and the town buzzed with speculation. Alara heard about it secondhand from Margaret, who came by under the pretense of borrowing sugar. "He's asking questions about you," Margaret said bluntly, settling at the kitchen table. "Showing that photograph to anyone who'll look. Most folks are telling him to mind his own business, but not everyone. Sarah Connolly seems real interested in helping him." Margaret's expression was sour. "That girl's got a mean streak, still hasn't forgiven Ronan for marrying you instead of crawling back to her." Alara felt ice in her stomach. What's she telling him? That you showed up out of nowhere, that the marriage was rushed, that you're clearly running from something. Margaret reached across the table, gripped her hand. "Alara, I don't know what you're mixed up in, and I won't ask. But I will tell you this. Garrett's not giving up. Whatever he's being paid, it's enough to make him persistent." "What should I do?" "Tell Ronan the truth, all of it. Because if Garrett figures it out first, you lose the chance to control how your husband finds out." She was right. Alara knew she was right. But fear had its hooks in deep. "I will," she said. "Soon." Margaret squeezed her hand once and let go. "Soon better come quick. Garrett's planning to ride out here tomorrow. Talk to Ronan directly." After Margaret left, Alara stood in her garden and looked at the young plants pushing up through the soil. Fragile things, fighting for survival in hard ground. She'd planted them, watered them, protected them from frost and birds and her own ignorance, and they were growing anyway. Maybe that was all you could do. Plant yourself somewhere and grow, despite everything trying to kill you. Garrett arrived the next afternoon, just like Margaret had warned. Alara saw him coming and went to find Ronan, who was in the barn repairing tack. "He's here," she said. Ronan set down his tools. "Stay in the house." "No." "Alara, no. This involves me. I'm not hiding." Something flickered in his eyes, concern or pride or both, but he nodded. They walked out together, a united front, and met Garrett in the yard. "Mr. Hale," Garrett said, tipping his hat. "Appreciate you seeing me." "Don't have much choice, seeing as you're on my land." "Fair point." Garrett dismounted. "I'll make this quick. I'm looking for a woman named Alara Whitlock, last seen in Cheyenne. Headed west. About 3 months ago." He pulled out the photograph. "Your wife looks an awful lot like her." "Lots of dark-haired women in the world," Ronan said evenly. "True enough, but how many of them show up in the middle of nowhere, marry a stranger inside a week, and happen to arrive right when my missing woman disappeared?" Garrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not a betting man, Mr. Hale, but if I was, I'd bet your wife and my missing woman are the same person." "Then you'd lose your money." "Would I?" Garrett looked at Alara. "How about you let the lady speak for herself? Mrs. Hale, is your name Alara Whitlock?" Alara felt Ronan tense beside her. This was it. The moment where the lies ended one way or another. "My name is Alara Hale," she said clearly. "And you're trespassing." "That's not what I asked." "It's the only answer you're getting." Garrett's expression hardened. "Here's the thing, ma'am. I've got legal authority to investigate missing persons. That includes asking questions and, if necessary, bringing people back to their families. Your family in Boston is real worried about you." "My family is dead." "Your cousin would disagree. Marcus Whitlock hired me personally. Says you disappeared without a word, and he's been sick with worry." The name hung in the air like smoke. Alara felt the blood drain from her face, saw Ronan's head turn sharply toward her. "I don't know anyone named Marcus Whitlock," she said, but her voice shook. "Now that's interesting," Garrett said, "because you just told me your family's dead, but you didn't ask who Marcus Whitlock was. Most people would ask if they didn't know." She'd made a mistake. A stupid, obvious mistake. Ronan stepped forward, putting himself slightly between Alara and Garrett. "I think you've asked enough questions." "With respect, Mr. Hale, this isn't your concern. My wife is absolutely my concern." "Is she your wife, though? Or is she a missing heiress using you for protection?" Garrett's voice went cold. "Because from where I'm standing, you've been played. This woman fled Boston to avoid her legal guardian. There's money involved, property, the kind of thing people kill for. Get off my land. Not until I get answers." "You want answers? Here's one. You've got 10 seconds to mount that horse before I make you." Garrett's hand drifted toward his gun. That's a threat, Mr. Hale. It's a promise. For a long moment they stood there, two men who'd seen violence and weren't afraid of it, measuring each other. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. Finally, Garrett stepped back. This isn't over. I'll be filing a report with the marshal. If she's who I think she is, the law will sort it out. You do that. Garrett mounted his horse, gave Alara one last long look, and rode off. The silence he left behind was deafening. Ronan stood perfectly still, staring at the dust cloud Garrett had left. When he finally turned to look at Alara, his expression was carefully, dangerously blank. Inside, he said, now. She followed him into the house. He closed the door, leaned against it, and just looked at her. Marcus Whitlock, he said finally. Your cousin. Yes. The one you said wanted you dead. Yes. So you lied. About your name. About why you were running. About everything. Not everything. He does want me dead. That part was true. Was it? Ronan's voice was soft, which was somehow worse than if he'd yelled. Because from what Garrett just said, it sounds like you're an heiress who ran away from her legal guardian. That's not the same as running from someone trying to kill you. He's trying to kill me! The words burst out. I heard him, Ronan. I heard him tell his lawyer that I was an obstacle, that women die all the time, that grief and accidents happen. You heard him say that, or you interpreted it that way. The question hit like a slap. You don't believe me. I believe you believe it. But Alara, rich people fight over money all the time. It doesn't usually mean murder. It means lawsuits and manipulation, and he killed my parents. The words dropped like stones. Ronan went very still. What? The carriage accident that killed them. It wasn't an accident. Her voice shook, but she forced herself to continue. The axle was cut, partway through, so it would break under stress. I found the reports afterward, hidden in Marcus's study. He paid someone to do it, and when I confronted him, he laughed, said I couldn't prove anything, said no one would believe me over him. And then you ran. And then I ran. Ronan rubbed his face with both hands, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked lost. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I thought you wouldn't marry me if you knew the danger. Because I was scared. Because... Her voice broke. Because I'm a coward who drags other people into her problems without asking. You're not a coward, but you are reckless as hell. He pushed off from the door, started pacing. If what you're saying is true, if Marcus really killed your parents, then this is bigger than a property dispute. This is murder, and you should have gone to the law, not run west. I tried. They laughed at me, said I was a grieving girl imagining things, that Marcus was a respected businessman and I was hysterical. So you came here. So I came here, to a family member I'd never met, hoping he'd help, and instead, I found you. Ronan stopped pacing, looked at her. And instead of trusting me with the truth, you lied. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, Alara. Garrett's going to the marshal. The marshal's going to ask questions, and if Marcus is as connected as you say, he'll have lawyers, documentation, proof that you're his ward. The law's going to side with him. Then what do I do? I don't know. He sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. I need to think. Ronan, just give me some time. Please. She left him there and went to her room, closing the door softly. She'd done it, told the truth. And somehow, it felt worse than the lying had. Outside her window, the sun was setting. The mountains went purple and gold, beautiful and indifferent. She'd thought she could hide here. Thought distance and a new name would be enough. But the past didn't care about distance. It followed you wherever you went. The question was whether Ronan would still be there when it caught up. She got her answer that night when she heard him ride out. Just went to the barn, saddled his horse, and left without a word. She watched from the window as he disappeared into the darkness and felt something in her chest crack. He was leaving. She'd pushed too far, lied too much, and now he was cutting his losses. She should have expected it, should have known better than to think a practical arrangement could survive this kind of betrayal. Alara went to bed alone and didn't sleep. Just lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting for dawn and whatever came with it. Ronan came back 3 hours before sunrise. She heard the horse, heard him in the barn, heard his boots on the porch. The door opened and closed. Silence. Then a knock on her bedroom door. "Elara, you awake?" "Yes." "Come out here." She pulled on her shawl and opened the door. Ronan stood in the kitchen, still wearing his coat, with papers spread across the table. "Where did you go?" she asked. "Town." Woke up the land office clerk, then the county recorder. He gestured to the papers. "These are the deed records for your parents' property in Boston. Also the will, the transfer documents, everything legally filed after their deaths." "How did you get those?" "Telegraphed to a lawyer I know back east. Cost me a favor and $50. But I got copies sent express." He pointed to a specific document. "Your parents' will names you sole heir. No mention of Marcus as guardian." "But he said—" "He lied. According to this, guardianship was supposed to go to your father's business partner, man named James Whitmore. You know him? He died 2 years before my parents. Heart attack." "Convenient." Ronan's finger moved to another document. "And here's where it gets interesting. After Whitmore died, your father filed new guardianship papers, named Edmund Hale as backup guardian if anything happened." Alara's breath caught. "Edmund, you're my uncle." "Yeah." Ronan's expression was grim. "So Marcus claiming legal guardianship is fraud. And if he's committing fraud about that, chances are good he's lying about other things too." "Why would my father name Edmund?" "They were friends. Years ago, before Edmund came west. Lost touch mostly, but apparently your father trusted him enough for this." "But Edmund's dead." "Yeah, which means guardianship defaults to Edmund's heir." Ronan met her eyes. "Which is me. And since you're my wife, you're legally my responsibility anyway. 2 ways, Marcus loses his claim." Alara felt tears sting her eyes. "You went to town to get proof, to help me." "I went to town to find out if you were telling the truth." His voice softened slightly. "Turns out you were. About the legal part anyway. Can't prove the murder without evidence. I know where it is, the reports, hidden in Marcus's study. Then we get them." "What?" "We go to Boston. We find the evidence. We give it to people who'll actually investigate instead of dismissing you." He started gathering the papers. "But we do it smart, legal, with documentation and witnesses and everything we need to make sure Marcus can't talk his way out." "That's insane. We can't just go to Boston." "Why not?" "Because it's dangerous. Because Marcus has people. Because you're scared." Not an accusation, just fact. "I get it. But Alara, you can't run forever. Eventually you have to stand and fight." "I don't know how." "Then it's a good thing you married someone who does." He gave her a small, grim smile. "I've been running from my own ghosts for 3 years. Figured it's time we both stopped." She stared at him, this hard man who'd shown up in her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known to speak. Who'd saved her from the storm, married her for practical reasons, and was now offering to fight a battle that wasn't his. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Because you're my wife, and I protect what's mine. Even when I lied to you, even then." He moved closer, and for the first time touched her face, gentle, careful, like she was something that might break. "You should have trusted me. But I understand why you didn't. I'm not easy to trust. Neither am I." "Then we're well matched." His thumb brushed her cheek. "We leave in 3 days. That give you enough time to get ready?" "For what?" "War," he said simply. "Because that's what this is going to be." They didn't make it 3 days. The trouble arrived first, in the form of cut fences and missing cattle. Ronan found it the morning after they'd made their plan, riding the north pasture to check the herd before the trip east. He came back to the house with his jaw set hard and his hand resting on his rifle. "Someone's been on the property," he said, not bothering with preamble. 10 head missing, fence cut clean in 2 places. Alara's stomach twisted. "Rustlers? Maybe. Or maybe someone sending a message." He grabbed his saddlebag from the hook by the door. "I'm riding to Carter's place, see if he's had similar trouble." "I'm coming with you." "No." "Ronan, no." He stopped, turned to face her. "If this is about you, about Marcus, then someone's already watching the ranch. I need you here where I know you're safe, door locked, rifle loaded. Anyone comes by who isn't me or someone you know, you don't open that door. Understood?" Yes, I mean it, Alara. Not for politeness, not for curiosity. No one. She nodded, and he left, taking half her certainty with him. The house felt too big with him gone, too quiet. Alara checked the rifle twice, made sure it was loaded, and tried to keep herself busy with normal tasks. Washing dishes, sweeping floors, anything to keep her hands occupied and her mind from spinning out worst-case scenarios. It didn't work. By noon, she was watching the windows like they might show her the future. By 2, she was pacing. By 3, when she heard the horses, her heart was already hammering before she saw who it was. Not Ronan. 3 riders coming slow and deliberate up the path to the house. She recognized none of them. They wore trail dust and hard expressions, and something about the way they moved set every instinct screaming. She grabbed the rifle and positioned herself by the window where she could see them but stay behind cover. They pulled up in the yard. The one in front dismounted while the other 2 stayed mounted, hands resting casual-like on their gun belts. "Mrs. Hale," the leader called out, "we need to have a word." She didn't answer, didn't move. "We know you're in there, saw you at the window." He took a step closer. "We're not here to cause trouble, just want to talk." "Talk from there," Alara called back, keeping her voice steady. "You've got no business on this property." "Actually, we do. We represent Marcus Whitlock." "Your cousin? He's real concerned about you." The name hit like ice water. She tightened her grip on the rifle. "Don't know who that is?" The man laughed, the sound carrying no humor. "See, that's funny, because he knows exactly who you are. Alara Whitlock, heiress to the Whitlock estate. Missing for 3 months now." He pulled a paper from his coat. "We've got legal papers here. Order from a Boston court saying you need to return for a competency hearing." "A what?" "Competency hearing. See, your cousin's worried about your mental state. Says you've been unstable since your parents died. That you might be a danger to yourself. The court agrees. They've appointed him temporary guardian until you can be evaluated." Alara felt the floor tilt under her feet. Marcus had outmaneuvered her. If she was declared incompetent, he'd control everything. And if she resisted, it would only prove his claim. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "That's not really your choice, ma'am. We've got the law on our side." "You've got a piece of paper. That's not the same thing." "Close enough." The man nodded to his companions. They dismounted. "Now, you can make this easy and come peaceful, or you can make it hard. Either way, you're coming with us." "My husband ain't here, and by the time he gets back, we'll be long gone." The leader started toward the porch. "Put down the rifle, Mrs. Hale. Nobody needs to get hurt." Alara raised the rifle, aimed it square at his chest. "Take another step and find out how good a shot I am." He stopped, reassessing. "You really want to do this? Shoot a man following legal orders." "I want you off my property." "Can't do that." "Then I guess we have a problem." For a long moment, nobody moved. The 3 men calculated odds. Alara tried not to let them see her hand shaking. Then one of the other men shifted, hand moving toward his gun, and everything happened fast. Alara fired, not at him, but at the ground near his feet. The shot cracked like thunder, sent dirt spraying. The horses spooked, rearing. The men scattered, reaching for their own weapons. She chambered another round, fired again, aimed high this time, sending the shot over their heads but close enough to make a point. "Next one's not a warning," she shouted. "Crazy bitch!" One of them had his gun out now, returning fire. The bullet splintered the doorframe inches from her head. Alara dropped back, heart hammering, as more shots punched through the walls. She'd started this, and now she had to finish it or die trying. She fired through the window, not really aiming, just keeping them back. Heard one of them curse. The shooting stopped for a moment, and she used it to reload with shaking hands. "You're making this worse for yourself," the leader yelled. "We'll burn you out if we have to." She believed him. Could already smell smoke, faint but growing. They torched something, probably the barn. Ronan was going to kill her, if she survived long enough for him to get the chance. More gunfire. She returned it, trying to make every shot count. She wasn't a good shot, not really, but she was angry and desperate, and that counted for something. A bullet caught her arm, just a graze, but it burned like fire. She gasped, pressed against the wall, trying to think through the pain and fear. They were going to win. 3 against 1, and she was running out of ammunition. Then she heard it. New gunfire coming from a different direction, heavy caliber, precise. and one of the men in the yard went down screaming. Ronan. He came in hard, rifle firing as he rode, and the precision was terrifying. Another shot, another man hit. The leader tried to return fire, and Ronan's next bullet took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. The third man ran for his horse. Ronan let him go, more concerned with reaching the house. He was off his horse before it fully stopped, taking the porch steps 2 at a time. Alara! Here! She stumbled toward the door as he burst through, and he caught her, hands running over her, checking for damage. You hit? Just my arm, graze. His eyes found the blood, and something in his expression went cold and deadly. He set her aside, gentle but firm, and walked back outside. The leader was on the ground, trying to crawl toward his horse. Ronan's boot came down on his wounded shoulder, and the man screamed. Who sent you? Ronan's voice was flat, empty of everything except purpose. Go to hell. Ronan pressed down harder. Wrong answer. Try again. Whitlock! Marcus Whitlock! The words came out in a rush of pain. He paid us to bring her back, said she was crazy, that the courts wanted her. You got papers to prove that? In my coat. Ronan found them, scanned them quickly. These are fake. Bad fakes. I don't know about that. We just do what we're paid for. Yeah? Ronan crouched down, made sure the man could see his eyes. Well, you just got paid to make the worst mistake of your life. You came onto my land, shot at my wife, burned my barn. That's 3 reasons I should kill you right now. You can't. I absolutely can. Self-defense. You fired first. Ronan stood. But I'm not going to. Know why? Because you're going to deliver a message for me. What message? You tell Marcus Whitlock that if he wants Alara, he can come get her himself, not send hired guns with fake papers. And you tell him that when he does, I'll be waiting. Ronan's voice went quieter, which somehow made it worse. And you make real sure he understands that I don't miss. He hauled the man to his feet, shoved him toward his horse. Take your friend with you, the one still breathing. Leave the dead one. He's evidence. The leader didn't argue, just collected his wounded companion and rode out, blood trailing behind them. Ronan watched them go, then turned back to Alara. The coldness in his expression melted into something closer to fear. Let me see your arm. She let him examine the wound. He was right, just a graze, but it had bled enough to soak her sleeve. He tore a strip from his shirt and bound it with hands that were remarkably steady considering what had just happened. You could have been killed, he said quietly. So could you. I can handle myself. You're supposed to stay safe when I tell you to stay safe. They were going to take me. So you started a gunfight. Not a question, not quite approval, but not anger either. Where'd you learn to shoot like that? I didn't. I was mostly just pointing and hoping. He almost smiled. Almost. You hit one of them. Luck, maybe. He finished with the bandage, but his hands lingered. You've got more fight in you than I gave you credit for. I had a good teacher. I never taught you to shoot. Not that. The fight. She met his eyes. You don't quit, even when you should. I'm just following your example. This time he did smile, small but real. Then it faded. We can't stay here. Marcus knows where you are now. He'll send more people, better people, and next time we might not get lucky. So we run? So we attack. He pulled her toward the house. Pack what you need. We leave in an hour. For where? Boston, like we planned, but we're not going to gather evidence and play it safe. His expression hardened. We're going to burn Marcus's world down. An hour later, they were on the road. Ronan had buried the dead man, put out the barn fire before it could spread, and loaded supplies like he was preparing for war. Because, Alara realized, he was. They rode hard for redemption, where Ronan sent a telegraph to his lawyer contact in Denver and another to someone in Boston whose name he didn't share. He moved with purpose, every action calculated, and Alara saw a side of him she'd only glimpsed before. This was a man who knew violence, who understood how power worked and wasn't afraid to use it. At the hotel, while Ronan arranged their passage east, Alara caught sight of her reflection in a mirror. Dusty, blood-stained, with wild eyes and a bandaged arm. She looked like someone who'd been through a war. She looked like she'd survived. Margaret found them before they could leave town, bursting into the hotel lobby with her usual lack of ceremony. "I heard there was shooting at your place," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Everyone's talking about it." "There was," Ronan confirmed. "We handled it." "Handled it how?" "Sent them running with a message." Margaret looked between them, reading the situation faster than anyone had a right to. "This is about her, isn't it? About whoever's chasing her." "Yes." "And you're leaving?" "Yes." "For how long?" "However long it takes." Ronan's tone didn't invite argument. "Can you keep an eye on the ranch while we're gone? I've got Carter handling the livestock, but the house, I'll watch it." Margaret gripped Alara's hand. "You be careful, both of you. Men who send hired guns don't stop just because the first attempt failed." "I'm counting on it," Ronan said grimly. The train east was crowded, loud, and gave Alara too much time to think. They had a private compartment, Ronan having spent what had to be a small fortune to secure it, and she spent the first day watching the landscape change through the window. Wyoming gave way to Nebraska. Flat prairie stretched forever. Then Iowa, greener and more settled. Each mile closer to Boston felt like returning to a life she'd thought she'd escaped. Ronan sat across from her, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. He'd been quiet since they'd boarded, lost in whatever strategic planning happened in his head. "What's the plan?" she asked finally. "When we get to Boston, we find the evidence. Your parents' investigation, the proof Marcus had the axle cut, whatever documentation he's hiding. He'll have it locked away, probably in his study safe. Then we get into his study safe." Just like that. Just like that. He looked up from the rifle. "I assume you know the house layout?" "I grew up there." "Good. Draw me a map. Mark where his study is, where he keeps his papers, any servants who might be a problem. We'll go in at night when there's fewer people to deal with." "That's breaking and entering. That's getting back what's yours." His eyes met hers. "Unless you've got a better idea?" She didn't. And the truth was, part of her relished the thought of sneaking into Marcus's sanctuary and taking from him the way he'd taken from her. "There's a servant entrance," she said. "Off the kitchen. It's how the staff come and go. There's usually only a night watchman after 10, and he drinks. Heavy. So we go at midnight." "We? You think I'm letting you go in there alone?" He set down the rifle. "We're in this together now, for better or worse. That's what the marriage vows said, right? You said those vows didn't mean anything." "I lied." The admission came quietly. "They meant something. I just didn't want to admit it." Alara felt her chest tighten. "When did they start meaning something?" "Probably the moment you shot at 3 armed men instead of hiding under the bed, like a sensible person would have." He leaned forward. "You're reckless and stubborn, and you lie when you're scared. But you're also brave and loyal, and you fight for what's yours. That means something to me." "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just—" He reached across the space between them, took her hand. "Don't die in Boston. I've got plans for when we get back." "What kind of plans?" "The kind that involve you being alive." It was the closest he'd come to saying he cared, that he wanted her to stay, not just for the arrangement, but for herself. And even though the timing was terrible and the situation was worse, Alara felt warmth spread through her chest. "I'll do my best," she said. "That's all I ask." They reached Boston 3 days later, and the city hit Alara like a physical blow. The noise, the crowds, the smell of coal smoke and horse manure, and too many people in too small a space. After months of Wyoming's vast silence, it felt suffocating. Ronan noticed her reaction. "You all right? This used to be home. And now? Now it feels like a cage." He squeezed her hand, brief and reassuring, then released it. They checked into a modest hotel under false names, and Ronan went out immediately to scout while Alara drew the maps he'd requested. Her parents' house was in Beacon Hill, a 3-story brownstone that had been in the family for generations. Marcus had moved in after their deaths, claiming it as part of his guardianship duties. The thought of him walking those halls, sleeping in her father's room, made her sick. When Ronan returned that evening, he had news. "Your cousin's hosting a party tomorrow night. Big social event. Half of Boston society will be there." "How do you know that?" "Asked around. Apparently he's quite the socialite now that he's got money to throw around." Ronan spread out the map she'd drawn. This party is perfect for us. He'll be distracted, the house will be full of people, and we can slip in and out without being noticed. There'll be servants everywhere. Good. More chaos to hide in. He pointed to the servant entrance. This is our way in. You said the night watchman drinks? He used to. Then we bring him something to help that along. Once he's out, we've got maybe 2 hours before anyone notices. And if we get caught? We don't. His voice was hard, certain. But if we do, you run. Get out. Get somewhere safe. Don't look back. I'm not leaving you. Yes, you are. Because this isn't about pride. It's about survival. He caught her chin, made her look at him. Promise me. If things go wrong, you run. Ronan, promise. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she was done running, that they were partners in this. But the look in his eyes said this wasn't negotiable. I promise, she lied. He knew it was a lie, but didn't call her on it, just nodded and went back to planning. The next night, they dressed for the part. Ronan in a borrowed suit that made him look almost civilized, though nothing could quite hide the edge of violence in his bearing. Alara in a simple black dress and veil, playing the part of a widow hired for the evening help. They approached the house from the back, through the alley where deliveries came. The servant entrance was exactly where Alara remembered, and the lock was the same one her father had installed 10 years ago. She picked it in under a minute, hands remembering what her mind had tried to forget. Inside, the house was chaos and light. Music drifted from the ballroom upstairs, along with laughter and conversation. Servants rushed past, carrying trays of champagne and canapes, too busy to notice 2 more people in dark clothes. The night watchman was in the kitchen, exactly where Alara had predicted. He looked older, grayer, but still the same man who'd snuck drinks from her father's liquor cabinet when he thought no one was watching. Ronan handed him a bottle. Compliments of the host, for your hard work. The watchman's eyes lit up. Mr. Whitlock sent this? Finest Irish whiskey. Said you deserved it. The man didn't question it further. Just took the bottle and disappeared into his corner, and within 20 minutes, he was snoring. Ronan and Alara moved through the house like ghosts. She led him through the back hallways, avoiding the main stairs where guests mingled. Every corner held memories. Her mother's sitting room, her father's library, her own childhood bedroom, now converted to something else. Marcus's study was on the 2nd floor, tucked away from the party. The door was locked, but Alara had the key. Or rather, she knew where her father used to hide the spare. Top of the door frame, right side. Still there. The study looked different than she remembered, darker. Her father's warm oak furniture had been replaced with heavy mahogany. His books were gone, replaced with legal volumes and ledgers. But the safe was in the same place. Behind the portrait of her grandfather, hidden in the wall. Ronan examined it, ran his fingers over the dial. You know the combination? My father's was my mother's birthday, but Marcus probably changed it. Probably. He pulled tools from his coat. Good thing I came prepared. You can crack a safe? I have many talents. He set to work, ear pressed against the metal, listening to the tumblers. Keep watch at the door. Alara positioned herself where she could see the hallway. The party sounds drifted up, loud enough to cover any noise Ronan was making. She tried to calm her racing heart, tried to prepare for what they might find. Evidence of murder, proof that Marcus had killed her parents, or nothing. Just paranoia and grief making her see conspiracies where none existed. Got it, Ronan said. The safe swung open. Inside were stacks of papers, some cash, a few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to her mother, and tucked in the back, a leather portfolio. Ronan pulled it out, opened it. His expression went cold. What is it? Alara whispered. Letters. Between Marcus and someone named Garrett. The bounty hunter? No, different Garrett. Thomas Garrett, looks like. A mechanic. He read quickly. Alara, this is it. This is him discussing the carriage, the payment, everything. She crossed to him, looked over his shoulder. There it was, in Marcus's own handwriting. Instructions for the sabotage. Payment records. Even a note afterward congratulating himself on how smoothly it had gone. Her parents' murder, documented like a business transaction. He kept it, she breathed. Why would he keep evidence like this? Arrogance. Insurance. Maybe both. Ronan was already stuffing the portfolio inside his coat. Doesn't matter. We've got it. Let's go. They were halfway to the door when it opened. Marcus stood there, perfectly composed in his evening wear, with two large men behind him. Not the hired guns from Wyoming. These were professional, patient, and armed. "Hello, cousin," Marcus said pleasantly. "I've been expecting you." Alara's first instinct was to run, but Ronan's hand on her arm stopped her. Not restraining, just steadying. Marcus smiled, the expression never reaching his cold eyes. "Did you really think I wouldn't know you were here? That I wouldn't prepare for this exact scenario?" He stepped into the study, his men flanking him. "I've been 3 steps ahead of you since you fled Boston, dear cousin. Every move you've made, I've anticipated." "Then you know we have the letters," Ronan said, his voice steady. "The evidence of what you did." "Evidence?" Marcus laughed. "Is that what you think those are? They're insurance, Mr. Hale. Leverage against people who might question my methods. But they're worthless to you. Who would believe a runaway heiress declared mentally unstable by the courts? Who would believe a frontier rancher with no standing in Boston society?" "A jury might," Alara said, finding her voice. "When they see your handwriting, your signature, payment records for murder. Murder is such a strong word, and proving it requires those letters to see daylight, which they won't." Marcus nodded to his men. "Take the portfolio, and deal with them." The 2 men moved forward. Ronan's hand went to his hip, but Marcus tisked. "Your gun is downstairs with the coat check, remember? House rules. No weapons at social gatherings." His smile widened. "You're outmanned, outmaneuvered, and out of options. The smart play is to surrender the portfolio and leave quietly. I'll even let you go. Both of you. Just walk away and pretend this never happened." "And let you get away with murdering my parents?" Alara's voice shook with rage. "Never. Sentiment over sense. How disappointing." Marcus sighed. "Very well. Gentlemen, if you would—" Ronan moved, not toward the men, but toward the window. In one fluid motion, he grabbed a brass lamp from the desk and hurled it through the glass. The crash was deafening, and the screams from the party below even more so. "Fire!" Ronan shouted down at the crowd. "Fire in the study!" Chaos erupted instantly. Guests stampeded for exits. Servants rushed with buckets. And in that moment of confusion, Ronan grabbed Alara's hand and bolted. Not for the door where Marcus blocked the way, but for the servant stairs, narrow, hidden, the route she'd used as a child when she didn't want to be seen. "Stop them!" Marcus's voice cracked with fury. But they were already moving, Ronan pulling her through passages she'd mapped in her mind earlier. Behind them, heavy footsteps pounded. Shouts echoed through the halls. They burst into the kitchen, scattering staff, and headed for the back exit. Almost there. Almost free. One of Marcus's men appeared in the doorway, blocking their escape. Big, professional, with a gun already drawn. Ronan didn't slow down, just grabbed a cast iron skillet from the counter and threw it with the precision of someone who'd spent years working cattle. It caught the man square in the face, and he went down hard. They were through the door and into the alley before he stopped moving. "This way," Alara gasped, leading them left toward the street. "No, they'll expect that." Ronan pulled her right, deeper into the network of back alleys that serviced the wealthy homes. "Trust me." She did. Followed him through darkness and narrow passages, over fences and through yards, until the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. They finally stopped in a small park, both breathing hard. Ronan checked to make sure the portfolio was still tucked in his coat. "Still there," he confirmed. "Now what?" "Marcus knows we have it. He'll come after us with everything he has." "Let him." Ronan's expression was grim. "We're not running anymore. We're taking this to the law. The real law, not whatever corrupt judges Marcus has in his pocket." "Who?" "Federal Marshal. Name's William Cross. He owes me a favor from years back, and he's the one person in this city Marcus can't buy." Ronan straightened his coat. "We go to him tonight. Turn over the evidence. Let the system work. And if it doesn't, then we make it work." They found Marshal Cross at his home, a modest brownstone in a respectable but not wealthy neighborhood. The man who answered their knock was in his 50s, with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. "Ronan Hale," Cross said, surprise evident. "Didn't expect to see you in Boston. Thought you'd sworn off civilization." "I did. But sometimes civilization comes looking for you." Ronan gestured to Alara. "This is my wife, Alara. We need your help." Cross studied them both. disheveled, clearly on the run, and stepped aside. "Come in. Tell me everything." They did. Alara started with her parents' deaths, the suspicions she'd had, Marcus's threats. Ronan filled in what happened after, from finding her in the storm to the attacks on the ranch to tonight's confrontation. Cross listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When they finished, he held out his hand for the portfolio. "May I?" Alara handed it over, watched him read through the letters with the methodical attention of someone who'd spent a lifetime evaluating evidence. Finally, he looked up. "This is murder. Premeditated, documented, clear as day. But you understand what you're up against? Marcus Whitlock has connections, money, lawyers who'll tear apart every piece of this." "Can you build a case that'll stick?" Ronan asked. "Maybe. Probably." Cross set down the portfolio. "But it'll take time, weeks, maybe months to investigate properly. To find the mechanic mentioned in these letters, get witness testimony, build something ironclad. And during that time, Marcus will know we're coming. He'll have the opportunity to destroy evidence, threaten witnesses, make himself untouchable." "So what do we do?" Alara asked. Cross smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "We move fast. Strike before he can react. I've got jurisdiction to bring him in for questioning based on this evidence. We arrest him tonight, hold him while we build the case. No bail for murder suspects, even rich ones." "Can you do that?" Alara asked. "Just arrest him? I'm a federal marshal investigating a credible murder accusation with documented evidence. I can do whatever the law allows. And sometimes," his smile turned sharper, "a little bit more." Within an hour, Cross had assembled a team. 4 other marshals, all men he trusted, all armed and ready. They moved through Boston's dark streets like a small army, and when they arrived at the Whitlock house, the party was still going strong despite the earlier fire scare. Cross didn't bother with subtlety. Just walked straight through the front door, badge out, his men behind him. The music stopped. Conversation died. Every eye turned to the marshals. "Marcus Whitlock," Cross called out, his voice carrying. "I'm placing you under arrest for the murders of Jonathan and Catherine Whitlock." The room erupted, gasps, shouts. Marcus himself appeared on the stairs, face composed but eyes blazing. "This is absurd. I'm their nephew. I loved them." "That's not what your letters say." Cross nodded to his men. "Take him." Marcus's hired men moved to block them, hands going to weapons. For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Cross drew his gun. So did his marshals. 6 weapons trained on Marcus and his people. "Nobody moves," Cross said quietly. "This is a federal arrest. Anyone who interferes becomes a federal criminal. Is that what you want?" Marcus's men looked to him for orders. Marcus stood frozen, calculating odds that weren't in his favor. "Stand down," he said finally. "This is a misunderstanding that will be cleared up by morning. My lawyers will meet you at the federal courthouse." Cross gestured, and 2 marshals moved forward to restrain Marcus. "You have the right to remain silent, though I doubt you will." They took him out in handcuffs, past a crowd of Boston's elite watching in shock. Alara stood in the doorway with Ronan, watching her tormentor finally face consequences. Marcus saw her as they passed, his expression twisted with rage. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You can't prove anything. I'll be free by morning and you'll be the one in chains." "Maybe," Alara said. "But at least I'll sleep tonight knowing you're in a cell." They took him away, and for the first time in months, Alara felt like she could breathe. The trial took 3 months to prepare. Cross was right. Marcus had lawyers, connections, people willing to testify to his good character, but the evidence was damning. The letters in his own hand, the mechanic they found, willing to testify in exchange for immunity. The money trail Cross uncovered showing payment after payment for services rendered, and Alara herself taking the stand to describe her parents, what they'd meant to her, how Marcus had moved into their home and their lives like a parasite. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they came back, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on both counts of murder. Marcus's face went white as they read the sentence. Life in prison, no possibility of parole. He'd spend the rest of his days in a cell, stripped of the wealth and power he'd killed to obtain justice. Imperfect, delayed, but real. Alara watched them take him away and felt something loosen in her chest. The weight she'd been carrying since her parents died, the fear that had driven her west, The certainty that Marcus would always be 3 steps ahead. All of it lifted. She was free. Ronan found her outside the courthouse, standing in spring sunshine that felt impossibly bright. He didn't say anything, just stood beside her, solid and real, until she was ready to speak. "It's done," she said finally. "Yeah. I keep waiting to feel different, lighter, but I just feel tired." "That's normal. You've been running on fear and anger for months. Now that it's gone, you're feeling the cost." She turned to look at him. "What do we do now?" "We go home." He took her hand. "Back to Wyoming. Back to the ranch. Back to the life we started building before all this." "Is it enough? That life?" "Is it enough for you?" he countered. Alara thought about the ranch. The harsh beauty of the land, the silence that had terrified her at first and then became a comfort. The garden she'd planted, the house she'd learned to run, the man beside her who'd started as a stranger and become something she didn't have words for yet. "Yes," she said, "it's enough." They returned to Wyoming in early summer, when the mountains were green and the ranch was exactly as they'd left it. Margaret had kept her word, watching the place, and the house welcomed them back with familiar creaks and smells. That first night, Alara stood in the kitchen making dinner while Ronan sat at the table cleaning his rifle. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with the small sounds of a shared life. "I've been thinking," Ronan said, not looking up from his work. "About? About what we talked about before. Separate lives, separate bedrooms, all that practical arrangement nonsense." Alara's hand stilled. "What about it?" "I was wrong." He set down the rifle, finally meeting her eyes. "This isn't practical anymore. Hasn't been for a while, and I'm tired of pretending it is." "What are you saying?" He stood, cross to her, took her hands in his. "I'm saying I want a real marriage. Not an arrangement. Not a convenience. Real. Ronan, I'm saying I love you. Have for a while now, even when I was too stubborn to admit it. Watching you fight those hired guns, seeing you stand up to Marcus in that courtroom, coming home to find you here making dinner like this is where you belong." He stopped, struggling with words that didn't come easy. "You're the bravest person I know, and I don't want to waste any more time pretending I don't need you." Alara felt tears prick her eyes. "I thought you didn't do feelings." "I don't. Didn't. But you changed that." His thumb brushed her cheek. "You changed everything." "I love you too," she whispered, "even when you were being impossible and cold and pushing me away." "I was protecting myself, didn't want to hurt again like I did with Clara." His voice dropped. "But I realized something. Keeping distance doesn't protect you from hurt. It just guarantees you'll be alone when it comes." "And you don't want to be alone anymore?" "No. I want to be with you, build a life that's actually ours, not just some practical arrangement." He pulled her closer. "If you'll have me?" "I married you once already. Might as well make it count for something." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like their wedding had been. That had been obligation and survival. This was choice. This was real. When they finally broke apart, Alara rested her forehead against his. "So what now?" she asked. "Now we live. Run the ranch. Maybe expand the herd. Plant a bigger garden." His hand settled at her waist. "Maybe fill some of these empty rooms. Children? Eventually. If you want. No rush." His expression sobered. "I know what happened to Clara, what I lost. And I won't lie. The thought terrifies me. But I also know that fear isn't a reason not to live. We'll be careful, and we have each other. That's more than most people get. It's more than I thought I'd get again." He kissed her forehead. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up. On me. On us. On the possibility that something good could come from something that started so badly." Alara thought about the storm that had nearly killed her, the desperate arrangement that had saved her, the lies and secrets and violence that had almost destroyed everything, and how, through all of it, they'd found something worth fighting for. Not perfect, not easy, but real. "I think that's what life is," she said, "taking the bad things and finding a way to make them into something good. Not because it's easy, but because the alternative is giving up. And I'm done giving up. So am I." They stood together in their kitchen, in their house, on their land, and for the first time since either of them could remember, the future felt like something to look forward to instead of something to survive. The months that followed were different. They were still practical people. The ranch demanded that. Still had silences between them, but now they were peaceful instead of tense. Ronan taught her to shoot properly, to ride better, to read the weather and the land. Alara taught him that a house could be more than just functional, that meals could be enjoyed instead of just consumed. That touch didn't have to mean weakness. They attended the women's gatherings together, Ronan dropping her off and picking her up like it mattered to him what she did with her time. They worked the ranch side by side, partners in fact as well as name. And at night, they shared the bed that had once belonged to Clara but now was theirs, building new memories to replace old ghosts. It wasn't always smooth. They fought sometimes. About money, about decisions, about Ronan's tendency to shut down when things got hard, and Alara's habit of taking on too much and refusing to ask for help. But they learned to fight fair, to apologize when they were wrong, to remember that they were on the same side even when it didn't feel like it. And slowly, carefully, they built something that neither of them had thought possible when they'd started. A home, a partnership, a love that was messy and imperfect and absolutely real. Winter came again, bringing snow and cold and long nights by the fire. Alara stood at the window one evening, watching the landscape turn white, and remembered the storm that had brought her here. How different she'd been then, desperate, afraid, convinced she had to face everything alone. Ronan came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" "About how I almost died in a storm like this. And instead you found me." "Lucky me," she said, but there was warmth in it. "Lucky us." He rested his chin on her shoulder. "Think about it. If that storm hadn't hit when it did, if I hadn't been riding that path, if you'd given up just a few minutes earlier, none of this happens. We never meet, never marry, never become this. You believe in fate? I believe in being grateful for the things that work out, even when they shouldn't have." He turned her to face him. "I believe in us." "So do I." Outside, the storm raged. Inside, they were warm and safe and together. And when Alara looked at the man she'd married out of desperation and grown to love despite everything, she understood something fundamental about survival. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about having all the answers or never being afraid. It was about finding someone who'd stand beside you when the storm hit, who'd fight for you when you couldn't fight for yourself, who'd give you a reason to keep going even when giving up seemed easier. Ronan had given her that, and she'd given it back to him. Two broken people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and built something beautiful anyway. That was the real story. Not the danger or the drama or the dramatic confrontations, but the quiet moments after, when they chose each other again and again, when they built a life from nothing but stubborn determination and the refusal to let the past define their future. Spring came, and with it new life. The cattle had calves, the garden broke through the soil, and Alara realized she was pregnant. She told Ronan one evening after dinner, just said it straight out because she'd learned he preferred directness to dancing around things. "I'm going to have a baby." He went very still. Emotions flickered across his face too fast to name. Fear, joy, terror, hope. "Are you sure?" "Yes." "How long?" 3 months, maybe. I wasn't certain until today." He was quiet for a long moment, and she saw him struggling. Saw him remember Clara, remember what he'd lost. Saw the fear try to take hold. Then he crossed to her, knelt in front of her chair, and took her hands. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Terrified, actually, but I'm also happy. More happy than scared. We'll be careful. We'll get the doctor involved early. We'll do everything right." "I know. And even if we do, things can still go wrong. That's life. That's the risk." He pressed his forehead to her hands. "But I'd rather risk it with you than live safe and alone." "Me too. We're going to be parents." "Yes. I have no idea what I'm doing." "Neither do I. We'll figure it out together." And they did. When the baby came in late autumn, a daughter with Alara's dark hair and Ronan's gray eyes, they named her Catherine after Alara's mother. And when Ronan held her for the first time, Alara saw tears in his eyes that he didn't bother to hide. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's ours," Alara corrected. "Alara." Margaret came to help in those first weeks, along with Anne and Helen and Martha. The women who'd cautiously accepted Alara now surrounded her with support, teaching her things her own mother would have taught if she'd lived. And Ronan, terrified and awkward at first, learned to change diapers and walk the floor at night and loved this tiny person with a fierceness that sometimes scared him. They were a family, imperfect, scarred by their pasts, but choosing each other every day despite the fear. Years passed. Catherine grew. They had a son next, named Jonathan after Alara's father. The ranch prospered, and Alara, who'd once been a terrified girl running from her past, became someone who stood firm in her present. Sometimes, late at night when everyone else was asleep, she'd think about Marcus in his cell, about the life he could have had if he hadn't let greed consume him. She didn't forgive him, couldn't, for what he'd taken, but she felt something close to pity. He'd wanted power and wealth so badly, he'd destroyed everything else. And in the end, he'd lost it all anyway. While she, who'd lost everything and run with nothing, had found more than she'd ever imagined possible. That was the lesson, if there was one. That running from your past didn't solve anything. That lying to protect yourself only delayed the inevitable. That real strength came from standing and fighting, from trusting people with your truth, from choosing to build instead of just survive. And that love, real, messy, imperfect love, was worth every risk. Ronan found her one night, standing on the porch watching the stars. The same porch where she'd first arrived half frozen and desperate. Where she'd made the choice to marry a stranger rather than face the world alone. "Can't sleep?" he asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Just thinking." "About?" "About how far we've come. How different things are now. You regret any of it?" She turned to look at him. This man who'd saved her life in more ways than one, who'd stood beside her through everything, who'd given her a home and a family and a future she'd never dared to dream of. "Not for a second," she said. He pulled her close, and they stood together watching the night sky, two people who'd found each other in a storm and built something that could weather any tempest. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, carrying the promise of winter. But they were warm, they were together, and they were home.